Around 54% of Australians aged between 61 and 70 experience some form of hearing loss, increasing to 74% in people aged 71 and over. So if you're shouting to be heard, or you're the one being shouted at, stick around. Audiologist Mitchell Quine is kindly taking time out of a very busy schedule to address all things to do with hearing loss. Hello and welcome to another episode of Ironing Out the Wrinkles. I'm your host, Ros McMaster.
And I'm your other host, Kate Shaw. Together, we're taking the age out of ageism, helping men and women embrace life after 50 with less fear. Mitchell completed a Master of Clinical Audiology from Macquarie University, Sydney, where he was also awarded Vice-Chancellor's Commendation for Academic Excellence. He started his career in a joint diagnostic and rehabilitative role, working directly with a number of ear, nose and throat specialists, along with a wider medical community. Now, as the owner of two North Brisbane Specsavers audiology stores at Brookside in Mitchelton and Strathpine, his focus is on adult rehabilitation. Mitchell, hello and welcome.
Hello.
So nice to have you with us. Do you mind explaining who's a candidate for hearing issues in the over 50 to 100 age group, and how can it be avoided?
Thanks for having me, first of all. So pretty much it can't be avoided. It is like death and taxes. It is always coming. We live so much longer than we used to even 100 years ago. So the system, which is a very mechanical based system, just wears and wears and wears. So lots of things contribute to it, but the longer we live, the more likely those things are to influence hearing. So it will always happen.
Yeah. So, is there something so it's unavoidable because we're aging, but do you see a lot of cases where we've created the damage? Like when we were young, our parents used to say, don't play the music so loud. We'd go to concerts where there was loud music. Are we contributing in some part to that?
Yes. So if you take the pure aging part out of it, then noise definitely makes a difference. People who have genetic predispositions, so there might be hearing losses in family, autoimmune conditions, lots of things that just you might pick up across the course of a lifetime might contribute to it and make it worse. Noise is probably the most controllable, or the only really controllable one of all those. So what your parents said is probably true. It doesn't mean you should avoid music or things all the time. You just need to be careful. So I hear a lot on a daily basis, parents asking about their children's headphones and whether they're too loud. And it's really, really hard to say, because what one person perceives as loud is not necessarily the same as what someone else perceives as loud. But if the person using it, if they feel any type of discomfort after listening to music for a period of time, usually feel it quite deep inside your ear, it's too loud. And if you have it for really long, extended periods of time, and it's part of your job, you should definitely have the volume checked by a proper piece of equipment to determine if it's too loud. So yes, it definitely makes it worse over time.
So, just as a matter of interest, has there been any studies done? Like back in the old day, we didn't actually have headphones like we do now, where they're poking right into our ears. Do you think the amount of use of headphones so close to the eardrum is making a difference now compared to back in the old day?
It definitely is. And the Australian government, or the National Acoustics Laboratory, which is a part of the Australian government that looks at hearing related things or sound in general, it's people get very focused on the actual concept of having something in your ear, but the thing in your ear is not actually a problem. You can have something in your ear for your whole entire life and it won't cause any damage. It's how loud the sound comes out of that. And that's the really hard part to measure, because if you have headphone X and headphone Y and they're both on level 10, one of them might be putting out a certain amount of sound, the other might be putting out a different. So there's no standardization. So it's really hard to predict. But if you can literally sit behind someone 6 seats back in a bus and hear their headphones while you've got the engine behind you, it's probably too loud.
Wow. Yeah.
So the best thing you can do is buy the best quality headphones you can. The bigger they are, the more they block outside sound. So the softer the sound you need to deliver your ears to get a good quality sound. So for all the parents trying to figure out what to give their children, the best, most expensive noise reduction headphones you can possibly buy will definitely help, because then you don't have to listen to it quite so loud to get a good quality sound.
Okay.
Oh, but they don't look so good.
No. Oh, but they're getting a bit, some of them look a bit cool, a bit funky.
Well,
I like
these
the big
things
round
are,
ones.
even these things now, they're really, really good, so you don't have to have it quite as loud. It blocks all the outside sound out. But it's still not the same as having,
No.
a big
Like
giant
recording
thing
studios.
on your
Yeah.
head. Yep. So that's a much,
Yeah.
much better quality, but unachievable for many, many people due to
Yeah.
cost.
Yeah.
So the other big thing is workplace noise. So that's usually the most likely thing to cause a problem, much more likely to cause a problem than social recreational noise exposure. So people who work in noisy jobs, that's why there's so many government regulations in place. And the government changed the rules a little while ago to make it the onus of the employer to make sure people look after their hearing. And then there was a big reduction in noise-related hearing loss from that point on. But there's certain generations where they never did it in the beginning. And even when those rules came in, they were like, I've never done it before. Why would I bother now? And the problem with that mentality is that it's accumulative. So hearing loss on top of age-related hearing loss based on noise, it just chips away at your hearing over a really long period of time. So it doesn't matter if you only listen to really loud noise for 1 year, that's probably done something. And then if you do everything else really good for 40 years, you still have that 1 year of accumulated damage, which will affect you in the long run.
Wow.
Gee. So even if you're working on the land, it's important, like doing fencing and things like that, which are quite noisy, and building sites, you should always wear ear protection. Is that what you're saying?
as much as you can. And if you're
Okay.
not sure, just put it on just in case. That's the best way.
That's
Because
great.
if
And
we're-
of course, this podcast is for people who are already older and dealing with problems, but we do like to tell our grandchildren what to do. So we'll be
Will they listen
sure
to
to get
us?
on their
I don't know
backs.
if they'll listen, but we can try. Can I ask, why is age a defining factor in hearing loss? Is there any way to actually avoid it? I know you said it's unavoidable, but there must be something we can
Well, there
do.
isn't really. So there's
Oh.
it's just because of the way the ear is structured. There's a very, very large mechanical portion to it. So we get, so basically a bit simplified, but air moves backwards and forwards, and then our ear sends that information into the inner ear. That turns it into electricity, and the brain interprets that electricity as sound. So the whole process of turning the movement of air into electricity is almost entirely mechanical. So if you use something a lot, just by living a long time and just having a normal life, listening to things, talking, getting up, listening to music, listening to TV, it just uses it more and more and more and more. So it just wears out. And the parts that are most likely damaged in age-related hearing loss are the most mechanical parts. So we still hear. It's not that when we go older we can't hear, but what we hear changes. And that's because of those parts. And they can't really do anything about it at the moment. You either fix it from an audiological perspective, or you do nothing. That's pretty much the choices.
Oh, wow. Okay.
For now.
I
Who
hope
knows?
they get
Stem cells.
Yeah, I was
Yeah.
going to say
Yeah,
stem cells.
technology is moving really
Little robots.
fast, so there's hope. But hearing just isn't about hearing. There's all sorts of reasons why hearing is important, and I think we were discussing that once before. And I hadn't thought about the broader social, emotional aspects of the need to hear.
Yeah, so most of our, so vision and hearing will always be ranked usually the top two senses. And if you ask someone whether they would rather have, if they were given a choice, which hopefully they never are, of having one or the other, most people will pick vision. The difference from an audiologist's perspective between vision and hearing is vision is a much more all-encompassing sense. So it connects us to things around us. It connects us to people. You can still have your eyes shut and have a really deep and meaningful conversation with someone that really allows us to be just like the mammals we are, big, large groups of people wanting to connect with other people. Because if you take those things away, it sounds a bit dramatic. What's the point? But that's not the way I intended to sound. But it allows us to build relationships in a different way. From an evolutionary perspective, it's a very good protective mechanism as well, because you can only see a certain tunnel, but the hearing allows you to hear everything around you. Acts as protection, helps us find things in different locations. But the most important thing, relationships. When you go out for dinner with somebody, What we're eating or the way we look are part of it, but the conversation, which is in the spoken language at least, as opposed to signing, is probably what we're really going for. We're not really
Yeah.
going to eat the food. We're going to be around other people, and hearing is the best sense for creating that.
It's a social thing. And so that's why when people start having hearing loss, it can lead to a sense of isolation and loneliness and depression, which is the really bigger,
It
broader
snowballs.
meaning,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Yeah,
So
so it
very
usually
important.
happens very slowly in that case, because hearing loss itself, if it was pure age-related hearing loss and you had a very quiet job like an accountant for your whole entire life, it's just so slow. The changes to people's behaviors, the way in which people approach social situations, they might come across situations where things are a little bit difficult and it seems like it's probably the location they're in, but that happens more and more and more and more, and it just slowly deteriorates. And then you look at that person from 10 years earlier or 20 years earlier to the way they are now. And if they could see the way they were, which we can't, because we can't live our lives twice, and we can't really remember what happened that long ago. For some people, it really does change how they are as a person in a social setting.
Yeah, to knock your confidence completely.
Knock your confidence and
Make you antisocial.
Yeah, and you start to believe the world is, not a very nice place. Like I know my father, he'll probably be listening to this episode, so no meaning it insult Dad, but when he's like many people who are losing their hearing, they're always blaming other people, like speak up, you're not speaking up, or they think you haven't said hello and you're just very rude.
And they're in denial.
Yeah, so they just start to think people are very rude these days, but it's only because they're not realizing they're losing their hearing.
It's a tricky one, because how can we convince someone that it's time to see an audiologist tactfully? Like, what are the indicators that we can say, hello,
that's an indication that someone's starting to need help.
Yeah, but tactfully, how do you do it? Any tips?
Send them to an audiologist. So the best. So this is where I defend people with hearing loss a little bit. So because if we look at purely age-related or noise-related hearing losses, what tends to happen is, if you think about your hearing like a piano, from low-pitched sounds all the way across to high-pitched sounds, these low-pitched sounds remain very good probably until the end, or at least they're the least affected sounds. So low-pitched sounds you can hear really, really effectively. But what happens with this part of the piano, it slowly gets more and more damaged, and it drops over and over and over time. So for the people with the hearing loss, they can hear things. It's not that they can't hear, and it's a really difficult concept, because when you take glasses off, things become blurry. Everything becomes blurry, but when you put them back on, it goes back to normal. But for the hearing loss people, they can still hear some things. So they can hear dogs from 5 streets away, garbage trucks from 5 streets away. They can hear sounds sometimes better than other people. So when they can't hear something that someone else has said, it's really easy to blame the other person, because, well, I can hear those things, you can't hear those things. You must be the one who's not talking properly. And it's funny, human behavior. When we think about things a particular way, it doesn't matter how many times we're given a really rational alternative. If we think something, it's really hard to break that barrier down. So in defense of the hearing loss person, that's why a lot of the time it's so hard to get through, because they can hear. And if we approach it by saying you can't hear, that's a really bad start, because they're like, well, I can hear, I'm talking to you right now. So I suppose the best ways to raise it are usually trying to get them to see things that you might be able to do that they haven't heard, with a really quick, immediate, specific example. The really common things that people have problems with are background noise. That's by far the most common. So if someone goes out, they can't hear what someone else is saying. Other people can. Asking people to repeat themselves all the time. But when, again, as a creature of habit, like we all are, people don't even realize they're doing it. They might ask 50 times a day and it's just normal. And because it wouldn't have been 50 times a day a year ago, or 5 years ago, or 10 years ago, it might have been 45 times, or then 40 times, then 10 times, and 5 times. It's really, really slow. So it's hard for people to identify. But yes, asking people to repeat themselves, saying that people don't speak clearly or distinctly is a really common one. Things sound really muffled. That's because of high-pitched hearing loss, or to the persons, because people's diction isn't right. And we were trained in articulation when we were younger, and people don't speak clearly anymore. Missing things like phone rings, doorbells, or phone ringers that are excruciatingly loud. That's a really common one in my clinic room. So if someone forgets to turn their phone off and the phone ringer goes off, it is literally painful for me sometimes. And for that person, they can't even hear the sound, or they're like, oh, someone's phone ringing. And people who are starting to avoid situations where hearing might be difficult. So saying no many more times than they may have once upon a time, going out to certain things, even with friends they're really close with, if it's in a certain type of environment that they know is going to be hard. So they're the most common. Oh, and the TV being very loud for the neighbours.
But I
Oh
can
my gosh,
imagine
yes.
if anyone thought I was losing my hearing and say it was really obvious, I could imagine there'd be a kind of grieving on my part. I'd be really upset and embarrassed. That's how I would feel. And I imagine a lot of people would feel the same.
Yeah, it seems to be, you know, with this being an ageism podcast, I think that's one of the things we come across quite a bit, is that stigma associated with aging, and to get arthritis, in a hip, to need a walking stick or a walking frame or a hearing aid, that's admitting that the body is getting older, which it is for everybody. So yeah,
No
there's a lot of
pretending.
need to be in denial,
Yeah.
unfortunately. So how do we get them to you? Do they need to realize that themselves, or you just hope they're
So
open enough to admit?
it's really person dependent. I mean, we're all different. We're all on a different journey. You know, people get there at different points in time. If you can just get people into the clinic to have a discussion, to try and debunk some of the myths they might have, or the barriers that they've built over a really long period of time after talking to someone who may have had a bad experience, or if you can just get them in, let us explain things in a way that is real and not tainted by relationships that they might have with certain people that have gone on for 20 or 30 years and people are angry. That's usually the best way. But the real truth of it is, a lot of the time people come into the clinic either because they've just one day they've woken up and they're like, that's it, I'm just going to do it. Or someone has pushed them in the door and they're really, really reluctant. But if you spend enough time with that person and explain things, some of those people will get onto things a little bit earlier than others, but some will need more time. But at least they've started the journey. So if someone is in a really, really stubborn state, or in a situation exactly like you were talking about before, Kate, where there's just an accumulation of things, just another thing, just having the conversation and being comfortable that person's come in, then even if they do something 2 or 3 years later, at least they came in and it's 3 years later, rather than not coming in and being 10 years later. You know, so starting the conversation. Don't be scared of us. We're a health profession, and we just want to help.
Yeah, that's fabulous. So the big question, what can be done about it now? What are the new technologies? Because I know there's some amazing stuff out there, and styles in hearing aids, you know, and cost-effective solutions is a really important one.
So technology is pretty much computer-based now. So all the hearing aids have got little computers in them, and the only thing that really changes is the computers get more efficient, just like your phones and your computers. They just, every year, something a little bit faster comes out. It doesn't completely destroy the old one in terms of performance. It's really gradual. Some people come in and say, look, I might as well wait a few more years for some new technology, but it really is such a slow, gradual change. Hearing aids themselves, they probably hit their peak in terms of how small they are a little while ago. And now the technology they put into a hearing aid can't actually be made small enough at the moment to keep making them so tiny. But they're usually not what people imagine. A lot of people come in and think, we call them beige bananas, the really big ones from 30 or 40 years ago that sort of stuck out really big behind the ear. They're long gone. Anyone who's got any hair, anyone who's got any hair over their ears is pretty much guaranteed not to see hearing aid. If you've got any hair on your ears at all, over your ears, it's going to be invisible. There's little ones that go in your ear. There's ones that go behind your ear. None of them get very big anymore. Much more comfortable than people think. We've got ways of working around arms of glasses. So there's lots of choices. And for anyone who's Australian who's listening, if you're a pensioner, the government basically funds everything, even small ones.
Good. Wow.
So there's sometimes there's trade-offs with small hearing aids. Sometimes people want small ones but don't have the right anatomy for small ones or the right type of hearing loss. for really little ones to go in the ear. So it's not always the best choice, but we will work with the person to meet what we want functionally. We want everyone to hear as good as possible or as well as possible. And some people want to look as good as possible, but that's subjective as well.
Yeah.
Oh, so
that's exciting.
I thought, I know there's different degrees of hearing loss, but I thought hearing loss was hearing loss. I didn't realize the type of hearing aid you had was dependent on the type of hearing loss you had. I thought that was just like, well, I've got hearing loss. Now, what type of, what do I think works best for me as far as looks go?
Sort of. So the ones that go, anyone you see with someone that's got a behind the ear and a little bit that goes into the ear, that will pretty much can be customized to match almost any hearing loss, right up to the point of implants, cochlear implants.
Yeah.
The ones that go in the ear only, they cause some physics related problems with people's own voices. So, I mean, you can reproduce the problem by anyone listening. If you stick your fingers in your ears and count to 5, that drumminess that you hear, that's a product of your own voice traveling through your body and getting trapped between your finger and your eardrum, and creates basically a little subwoofer. And we can't fix that problem unless we take our finger out of our ear. So if you've got a hearing aid shoved in there, sometimes you can't get rid of the problem. And that's only certain types of hearing loss cause that problem, but the most common type of hearing loss, including age-related hearing loss, generally causes that problem. So we can overcome it, but it makes the hearing aid much bigger than people think, which is why the vast majority of people have hearing aids behind. But it's not the only choice.
They can wear a hat too, can't they? You can wear a hat.
They can. Or they can grow these mullets that everyone's growing at the moment.
Don't.
It'd be perfectly
Can't wait till
fine.
they're out of fashion.
Well, and because the ones that were hooked behind the ear, I heard there was a big problem during COVID when we were wearing masks. Older people were ripping their hearing, losing their hearing aids.
Really?
Yeah, they were taking their face masks off, and it was dislodging
Poor
the hearing
things.
aids.
Yeah, it definitely makes. So our decision-making process definitely changed with COVID, like many other things changed with COVID. So we put more reinforcements on them and change the way the parts are going near, the way they're shaped. And we would do things that we wouldn't traditionally do anywhere near as much while masks were in play. So yes, having one that goes in your ear, if you're able to get one with a mask, is a vastly superior experience for the user.
Gee, I never thought of that. I really didn't. Yeah.
And the other big difference between a one that goes in and one that goes behind is usually how well it works in noisier places. So in almost every case, one that goes behind the ear, that's even a very small one behind the ear, is usually a better sound quality in a noisy place than one that goes in the ear, just because the ones that go in the ear are too small and you can't fit everything you need into them to make them sound as good as the behind the ear ones.
Yeah, because I didn't realize, well, I'd never given any thought to what a person with hearing aids is hearing. And you were saying last time that it's a very different sound, which is probably why a lot of people don't like having their hearing aids in. You have to still remind them.
Yeah. So look, it doesn't reproduce normal hearing. So what you were born with, what your dividing cells gave you, is an amazing tool that we don't have the ability to reproduce yet. The only way we'll be able to make it sound like it did exactly the same is through regrowth of the things that are damaged, which we can't do at the moment. So hearing aids themselves, if you could give yourself normal hearing and the best hearing aid ever made, set the best way possible, you would always choose the normal hearing. It doesn't mean that the hearing aid doesn't give you a much better experience than hearing loss, because it does in almost every case. Some of the determining factors in how well a hearing aid's going to sound is usually how early someone begins. So the earlier you do it, the more your brain can acclimatize to it, and it just becomes normal. It's like wearing glasses. If you get a new frame, you can sort of see the frame in your vision for a while. And then because you wear them so much, your brain just naturally resolves that, and you don't end up noticing the frames any longer. It's the same with hearing. You hear it so much, it becomes the new normal. So, but there will still be things that people with hearing loss, with the best hearing aids, won't be able to do quite as well as normal hearing people.
Is there, sorry, Kate, I was just going to say, I seem to have more trouble talking to someone on the phone when they're wearing hearing aids. Is that a thing? Is the phone more of a problem?
If they're streaming to a mobile, it should be fine. Most hearing aids will connect to a mobile and allow you to hear the person wearing the hearing aid, to hear the person calling them in both ears. That should be nice and clear. If they're not using streaming, the problem is, and I'm going to use my phone. So for instance, a mobile phone has a microphone just there, which is about this big. And your hearing aids, so your ear canal changes from being here to above your ear if it's a behind the ear hearing aid, and you've got to aim this tiny little microphone at this tiny little microphone on the hearing aid. So there's a sweet spot, right? There's a way you can use it, which looks a bit funny if someone's trying to find it.
Yeah.
So that can make it a little bit difficult. Often the person using the hearing aid just needs to hold the phone just a little bit higher up than they traditionally would, just about an inch higher, so they're aiming it at the top of their ear rather than in their ear.
That's a good tip.
Oh, that must be why older people tend to put their phone on loudspeaker, no matter where they are.
Yeah, I've noticed that. Didn't realise.
Yes, so it comes through. It's exactly why they do it. So it comes through both ears. But the phone itself is a very limited amount of sound that goes through it. Again, thinking about the piano keyboard example, as humans, we hear really, really wide pianos of sound, and the phone is a little tiny band of keys together, so it's already missing a whole bunch of information, and you've got to fight with trying to find a microphone. So landline phones are usually a bit easier because the microphone's big, or the speaker that the sound's coming out of is quite large. So if you're having trouble talking to someone who's not using Bluetooth on their hearing aids, tell them just to hold their phone up a little bit higher, and it'll probably help.
That's a good tip. Can you manage hearing loss without hearing aids?
You can, depending on how bad it is. It gets to a point where it's just really beyond a joke, and you can't hear basic things. It becomes unsafe. People have commercial driver's licenses and they can't hear beeps from other cars. That's really bad. But for a stereotypical type of age-related hearing loss, which might not actually be too bad, the person can still hear, but what they hear has changed. So if you can accommodate the environment a little bit to make it as easy as possible to hear by removing background noise, getting around soft furnishings, having people look directly at you when they're talking to you, you can fill the gaps in a little bit. So it's probably not the best solution, but it's definitely possible to go for a long time without actually needing a hearing aid, or without actually thinking you need a hearing aid. But the idea of a hearing aid is that it just makes that whole process much simpler. You no longer have to position yourself correctly. You no longer have to do all these behaviors that you may have learned very slowly over a very long period of time. You don't have to do those anymore. So it usually gives people more energy if they can just make their life simpler. Just like if I want to read a passage, I can do it with my glasses off, and I can struggle on for 3 pages if I like, or I put my glasses on and I can read 100 pages without a problem.
So it's like a relief, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's the big problem we find for people with long-term hearing loss who don't do anything. It just puts so much load on their brain to fill the gaps in other ways. So they go out to a noisy place, and 1 hour later, they're just out of energy, literally just trying to understand the conversation. So it doesn't have to be like that.
I don't need hearing aids yet, but I know when I go out to dinner and it's a noisy environment, it's exhausting.
Yeah, trying to make them yelling to be heard.
Yeah. And of course, you were saying something about, since we're on the topic of what we can do to help people who have hearing problems, speaking directly to them and looking at them. And what about when there's music playing at a live venue? If you're getting together with all the family at a pub and there's music playing, where do we position?
And everyone talking very loudly.
So having, for the people with the hearing loss or with a hearing aid, it applies to both situations, or anyone who might have trouble hearing in any environment. If you can have all the noise you don't want to hear behind you, so if you can separate everything and have everything of nonsense that's back here and everything you do want to hear in front of you, it makes a really, really big difference, separating that 180 degrees in space. You want to be close to the person, let them see your face, make sure that you aren't, it's a bit hard not to yell in that environment, but yelling changes the way a sound sounds to everybody. So it's not quite the same. So if someone can't hear you when you talk very loud, sometimes it's still hard to understand what they're saying because the way in which you're saying it has modified a little bit. And for hearing loss, that'll be a bit worse. Getting their attention. Don't try and have a conversation with the person at the other end of the table. That's just not realistic. Move to the other end of the table and sit near the person. That'll make a big difference, and try and position yourself mostly where it's the best optimal position to be with everything behind you that you don't want to hear, everything you do want to hear in front of you.
Yeah. Or I think if we're really thinking of the older people in the group that we're with, we just won't plan family outings at environments like that where they're going to feel isolated and left out because they can't hear properly.
Yes,
Yeah.
or be willing to move yourself. You know, the most common to help out the people who can't hear, or people who may have hearing loss with or without hearing aids. We're so accommodating for certain types of vision losses. You know, we will do everything for the person, but because you can't see a problem with hearing loss, it just gets written off as something that the person should be managing entirely on their own. But it's just life. You know, it's going to happen to everybody, and that should be something that we all consider. So if you're at a really big family gathering, like Roz and I will be from time to time, you want to pull the people to the side. Don't have the conversation in the middle of 15 or 20 people. You know, it's crazy to do in the middle. Pull them off to the side, have the conversation, actively try and do it, because if people don't feel comfortable enough to ask, they may never ask. You know, so you can be proactive and help them, and that means
It's like a
they're
hidden
not.
handicap, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's exactly what it is. It's exactly what it is. So, yes, it's funny with different cultures, the way that the view on age is different in different places, and what people are willing to do for people who may be older in different cultures varies. So the typical West way of doing things is, because we're very independent, as opposed to I'm trying to find the nice way to say it. We're a bit more independent, say, than someone who might be from a collective
Proud.
culture.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
so just dropping that barrier just a little bit to really, really help someone else, because we're all going to be living a really long time. You know, we'll all be living to 100 in no time.
Yes, yeah.
Yes, never been this. We never had this lifespan ever, have we?
No, it's crazy, living longer and longer. So, and you mentioned when someone comes to see you for a hearing loss issue, you'd like a buddy to come with them. Why is that?
Yeah, so usually the person they're around the most. Sometimes it's a child that will be forcibly coming with them, telling their parents, you've got to do something, or it could be a wife or a husband doing the same. But because it all stems back to having realistic expectations of what it means to either continue on with hearing loss or to get hearing aids, and how that's going to affect their actual ability to function. So people over very long periods of time of waiting, they start getting really agitated at certain things. They won't repeat things for their partners. They have to answer questions when they go out. They can't ask questions from other rooms like they used to be able to. The TV's turned up. Everyone's getting angry at everybody. So sometimes the partner comes with them and they think, oh, finally, I've got the person here. Everything's going to be fine now. And then we put the best hearing aids ever made, set the best way possible over multiple appointments, and tailored them better than they've ever been tailored for anyone ever before. And it doesn't necessarily do what they imagined it would. So it gives us a chance to explain to them what is going to happen, give them an insight into the person with hearing loss and why they might be doing the things that they're doing. And they're not necessarily selectively hearing or doing it on purpose. So they literally have a deficit which stops them from being able to do certain things. So they're not necessarily doing it on purpose to be mean or spiteful. So it just helps us set the expectations for the person with the hearing loss, but equally as important, anyone else involved with that person, because when that person leaves, if they've gotten hearing aids in particular, everybody needs to be on board. It's not a magic bullet. You can't click your fingers and make the hearing 20 again, and everybody goes back to the way things used to be. So if everyone understands, the outcomes are always much, much better.
Yeah, knows exactly what
and
to
there's
expect.
no shame and no stigma to go and get help. Yeah, we all got to get it through our heads. We're all going to get there. I didn't realise that.
But that's important for the partner to understand what they should be expecting when they get home.
We're all going to get it.
Yeah. So if they came every time, it'd be much better. Yeah.
Oh, that'd be good if they did. What do us hearing people need to do to support those with hearing problems? Like, for instance, do we talk louder or softer? Talk slowly. You already talked about tips about the noisy environments, which was great. But
I think you mentioned too, looking at them when we're speaking to them and
speaking louder.
Yes. Yeah. So getting people's attention is probably the best. Like one of the most common things we hear is, my wife expects me to hear her from another room. It's a really, really common one, and it's just getting people's attention, having line of sight. When you talk to someone, the types of things that you can't hear with age-related hearing loss have really prominent lip movements. They tend to be very, very easy to see if you have no facial hair. So everybody should just shave.
Okay.
But giving access to people's faces is really, really important. If someone can't hear you with or without hearing aids, and then you raise your voice immensely, it changes the way the sound is coming out, and it doesn't necessarily do what people intend it to do. So it actually sometimes doesn't make it any easier at all. If someone doesn't understand something you've said and you're doing all those things, try saying it a different way rather than just saying the same thing over and over and over again.
And not lose your temper.
Yes, because they just can't help it. I mean, even with hearing aids, that's typically not going to happen. But without hearing aids, they literally can't help it. It's some people might be doing it on purpose, but the vast majority of people won't be. Just trying to have the conversations in places that don't have lots of noise. I can see you've got a plant behind you. Lots of foliage tends to absorb things and make rooms not reverberant. So reverberation happens when there's lots of hard surfaces everywhere. So if you go to a really fancy restaurant with white tablecloths and really hard walls and hard ceilings, hard floors, the sound's it's a terrible place to be. So don't have your conversations there.
So lots of plants around us. Yeah.
Yes.
So is being in a park okay? I would have thought a big open environment, the sound gets lost as well.
It does. So it doesn't... It acts in a different way. So if you're in a hard room, sound's bouncing everywhere, which is really good for music, but not very good for talking. If you're in an outside environment, it travels far away and doesn't bounce back at all, which can sometimes be less effective. So nice, soft, padded white rooms for everybody, and everyone will get on just fine. Yeah.
I like that idea. I live in a white house with lots of plants.
All right, that's fabulous. That's been really interesting.
Yeah.
Was there a link? We're nearly ready to wind up, but I think, was there a link previously to dementia and hearing loss?
There is a relationship between cognitive function, so your brain's processing speed and performance, and hearing loss. So there's a really big study done over a long period of time by something called the Lancet Review. The media tends to sensationalize everything and tells everybody if they have hearing loss, they don't wear hearing aids, they're all going to get dementia. That's not how it works.
That's good.
But there is definitely a relationship. So we don't know what the relationship exactly is. There's a few theories. If you deprive yourself of sound for a long period of time, you have to work extremely hard to make up that difference. So your brain's got a certain amount of resources available to it. If you don't hear things quite so well and you have to get those resources from somewhere else, and if you work your engine really hard, it wears out over time. That's one of the more prominent theories. So if you do that for a long enough period, then you'll have issues down the track. It could be just that hearing leads to isolation, which we already know it does. Lots more people are less likely to do things. And we know that social isolation has a relationship with dementia. So we don't know exactly what it is, but there's definitely something there. And if you look at the research, considering how easy it is to correct hearing, if we take away the stigma and take away the ideas about the way it looks and the different things that people get concerned about, it is so easy to treat. It literally is one of the easiest deficits to treat. So don't think if you don't wear a hearing aid, you're going to get dementia, because that's not true.
Okay.
But there's something there. So you've got to watch the space though. You'd never see an audiologist with hearing loss without hearing aids, put it that way, ever.
Okay. All right.
Tinnitus or ears ringing.
I've
got a relative who's got that problem, and I'd love to know how do you get it, and can you fix it?
So fixing it is tricky. Getting it can start from anything. It can start from loud sound. Hearing loss can cause it. It's not a direct reason why it may have come about.
So it's like a high-pitched ring, isn't it?
Yeah, it's different for different people, but it usually is a high-pitched sound. Often it sounds like cicadas, but it's a separate thing to hearing loss. So people can have completely normal hearing and also have tinnitus. We could cut your ears out of your head, literally remove them from your head, and you would still have tinnitus. So even though we hear them in the ears often, it's not necessarily the thing that's responsible for creating it. it's a much more, we call it central problem. So it's a much more brain related issue. People tend to get it worse when they have had a really physically demanding day or emotionally demanding day. If they're stressed, it tends to get worse. When it's quiet, it tends to get worse. There's definitely things you can do about it. It's a much more complicated than we thought it was when I first started doing this. So what I know now is different to what I would have thought when I first started looking at tinnitus. So the best thing you can do is literally go to an audiologist first. So even if you have completely normal hearing, there's sort of tools and tips and strategies we can give you to help reduce the effect of the sound. Curing it completely is really hard, and it's probably an unrealistic, but we can definitely help people manage it much more effectively through the way they perceive the sound. And for a lot of people, that sounds a bit airy-fairy, but the example I normally give people in clinic is if I've had a really bad sleep and my children are whinging in the morning, I react really differently to when I've had a really good sleep and my children are whinging in the morning. So it's all about your perception. You can handle it much more effectively if you've got a particular view on it. And it starts with education, just like hearing loss. It starts with education. See your audiologist; they'll give you a really good understanding of what it is. And there's definitely things that can be done. A lot of medical people will say you can't do anything. What they mean is you can't actually take something or remove something to fix it, but you can manage it and make it much less obvious more often.
It's comforting.
Yeah.
That's really great to know. Thanks.
Yeah, the way you perceive it, that's so important. Like I know when I used to run a meditation group and someone would say, oh, I couldn't relax. I could hear the clock ticking. I'd say, well, use the ticking clock, focus on the ticking clock as a way to bring your focus in and help you meditate instead of it being thought of as an irritation.
Yeah.
Use it to your advantage.
Same as
Yeah,
hearing
well,
loss.
we actually, so we recommend meditation a lot for people with tinnitus that can't resolve it other ways. So that's the perfect example. In the real world, you have sound all around you, but your brain has a way of filtering out things that aren't significant. But letting through things that are perceived as significant. So a mother with a newborn baby in the middle of a thunderstorm can hear the baby cry from 3 rooms away, but when there's so much sound around, because her brain is wired to be able to get that sound through anything, because it's really, really, really considered important by the brain. So for people who consider tinnitus really, really important and they focus on it a lot, it's in the brain's best interest to monitor that sound, because it feels like something that's really important. It could even be a threat. So if we stop hearing it, it might get us. So if we just focus and focus and focus, and it's about breaking down that barrier, making your brain perceive it differently and not so threatening, that's usually what reduces the sensation of it. So in audiology, we can cover it up. Hearing loss, hearing aids are amazing for tinnitus. You put the sound in where you can't hear anymore, and for most people, tinnitus goes away while the hearing aids are in use, at least. And then we work on perception over time.
I like that you mentioned meditation. You use that because it's good for everything anyway in your whole body, isn't it? Not just hearing. And hearing, I feel a lot better after hearing you speak. It's not the end of the world when I need to go and get a hearing aid.
And we actually, I should let people know this is actually the second time you've come on to speak, because we interviewed Mitchell already, and because he is such a good audiologist, he was concerned that he hadn't really covered everything that was important, and so this has been as informative as the last one, and
Even
more
more
so.
Yeah.
So it's been absolutely fabulous. Thank you for giving up your time again, and you know that we're just going to ask you for some wise words to take us out. What to people who are struggling to accept hearing loss or are okay with accepting hearing loss? What's your wise words?
Early is the key. So the earlier we do things, the easier they are to manage in the long run. If we leave things long periods of time, our brain finds it more difficult to adapt to those sounds, but we also start to have other things that will affect our ability to use hearing aids if that's what's necessary. If we get really bad arthritis or neuropathies, or our vision starts to deteriorate, and then you're reliant on hearing aid as your 100% primary sense, as hearing as your primary sense, it's really, really hard to learn something new at that point. So start early. If you talk to an audiologist, it doesn't mean you have to use hearing aids, but it does mean we will tell you what your particular journey looks like, what to expect. If we wait, what happens? If you don't wait, what happens? So just have the conversation. That's the only thing that I would say is probably the most important thing, to have the conversation. At least you can make an informed choice about what the best course of action for you individually is.